The old stories called it the Whispering Woods, and they warned us to stay away. Elara knew those warnings by heart, but she walked into the shadowed canopy anyway. Her grandmother's cryptic tales of the deep roots were not just fables to her. They were a legacy. As a botanist and the last of her line, Elara was determined to find proof of the ancient knowledge hidden within the forest, to reclaim her family's forgotten role as keepers of the grove. The village threatened exile if she went, and the woods themselves were said to guard their secrets with unseen dangers. By the end of her journey, you will understand how this hidden doctrine holds the key to balancing our world. What secrets lie buried in the oldest forests, and what would you risk to learn a truth the world has tried to forget? A soft blue glow pulsed beneath the leaves, a trail of luminescent fungi leading Elara deeper into the woods. The air grew thick and heavy, humming with a low vibration that resonated in her bones. She found herself in a ring of ancient oaks, their bark shimmering as if dusted with starlight. In the center stood the Sentinel Oak, its trunk wider than her cottage, its branches a cathedral sealing against the twilight sky. The legends were true. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached, her hand trembling as she reached out. The moment her fingers touched the rough, warm bark, the humming intensified. The ground shuddered, and with a groan of shifting earth, the great tree's roots uncoiled like sleepy serpents, pulling back to reveal a dark, mossy opening in the earth. A wave of cold dread washed over her. What had she just awakened? The whispering began then, not from the wind, but from the shadows themselves. They were not words, but feelings, impressions of ancient suspicion. Do you belong here? You are not a keeper. You are a child of the village that fears us. The voices echoed the very doubts, clawing at her own mind. Was she truly prepared for what lay below, or was the village right to call her a fool? The entrance yawned before her, a mouth of darkness and damp earth. To turn back now was to betray her grandmother's legacy, to abandon the very purpose that had driven her here. Taking a steadying breath, Elara chose faith over fear. She stepped into the passage, her descent into the earth, a silent vow of reverence. A faint, ethereal glow beckoned from the depths, a promise of the answers she sought. But from the surface, a chorus of rustling leaves and snapping twigs whispered a different message. She was being watched, and her journey had only just begun. The air in the cavern was cool and still, carrying the scent of wet stone and ancient earth. Before her, the walls were not merely rock, they were a living tapestry. Intricate symbols, carved deep into the stone, pulsed with a soft, internal light that ebbed and flowed like a slow, steady breath. Elara's scientific mind raced to categorize the shapes, but it was her heart, steeped in her grandmother's stories, that truly understood. She saw not just lines and curves, but the elegant spiral of a fern's frond, the interlocking pattern of mycelial networks, and the graceful arc of a deer's antlers. This was a language of life itself, depicting a perfect, silent dance of symbiosis. It showed how the tallest tree relied on the smallest fungus, and how the predator and the prey maintained the forest's delicate equilibrium. Driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, Elara reached out and brushed her fingertips against a symbol of a leaf. The moment she made contact, the entire wall shimmered. The glowing lines retreated like startled glowworms, and then flowed back together, rearranging themselves into a new, more complex pattern. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and with a grating crunch of stone, a section of the passage behind her slid shut, sealing her in. The air immediately felt thinner, harder to pull into her lungs. The whispers returned, no longer just impressions, but sharp, silent questions probing her mind. Do you see the connection? Can you trace the thread of life? This was not a library, it was a test. A single misstep could bury her here. Panic clawed at her throat as she scanned the shifting symbols. Her time was running out. One sequence depicted a wolf hunting a rabbit, but the rabbit was shown thriving. Another showed a great tree falling, with new saplings bursting from its trunk. They were all pieces of the puzzle, but which one represented the true, unbreakable balance? Her own doubts screamed that she was just a botanist from a fearful village, unworthy of these secrets. Then her grandmother's voice, calm and sure, surfaced in her memory. The forest does not seek to conquer, my child. It seeks to harmonize. She pushed her fear aside, her eyes settling on a simple, intertwined pattern of a vine and a stone. It was a lesson her grandmother had taught her as a little girl, that even the hard, unyielding rock gives a home to soft, persistent life. Trusting that memory over everything, Elara traced the symbol for harmony. A wave of warm light spread from her touch, flowing through the carvings like liquid gold. The rumbling ceased, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. The wall before her split open, revealing a new, darker passage. She had passed the first test, but the chamber's reactive nature made one thing terrifyingly clear. The knowledge of the deep roots was not freely given. It was guarded by an intelligent, living system of traps that demanded more than curiosity. It demanded proof of worth. Taking a shaky breath, Elara stepped through the new opening, the way forward now clear. But from the deep darkness ahead, a low, resonant growl echoed up the stone corridor, a stark reminder that the forest's oldest guardians were now fully awake and aware of her presence. The growl vibrated through the stone floor, a deep, guttural sound that promised no escape. From the shadows ahead, a form began to take shape, rising to block the passage entirely. It was a creature of nightmare and majesty, a massive, bear-like being woven from the living roots of the forest. Glowing amber sap pulsed where its eyes should have been, and its claws were sharpened fragments of obsidian. This was the Root Warden, the guardian her grandmother's tales had only whispered about. Every instinct screamed at Elara to run, to flee back to the sealed chamber and its certain doom. But flight was the answer of the village, the response of fear. She was a keeper, or she was nothing. Her breath hitched as she forced her trembling hands to still. She remembered an old story, a fragment her grandmother had shared about a peace-bringing herb, a silvery leaf plant called Moonshadow Nettle that was said to calm the forest's fiercest protectors. With painstaking slowness, never breaking eye contact with the glowing sap lights, she reached into her pouch and retrieved the fragile, dried sprig. She did not throw it or offer it with an outstretched, demanding hand. Instead, she knelt, placing the herb gently on the stone between them, a silent offering of respect. The Root Warden loomed over her, its wooden body creaking. It lowered its great head, sniffing the air around the Moonshadow Nettle. The low growl softened into a curious rumble. For a terrifying moment, It seemed to stare into her very soul, weighing her intent. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it nudged the herb with its muzzle, and the silver leaves dissolved into a soft, shimmering dust. The path was clear, but as Elara moved to rise, a single, thorny vine shot out from the creature's form, wrapping swiftly, but not tightly around her wrist. The thorns did not pierce her skin, but a strange, tingling energy flowed from the vine into her arm, a sensation, both warning and connection. It was a mark. She was permitted, but she was also being watched. The root warden stepped aside, its immense form melting back into the shadows of the tunnel wall, becoming one with the stone and root once more. The immediate threat was gone, but the encounter had seared a new truth into her mind. The forest's protectors were not mindless beasts. They were judges, and they demanded adherence to an ancient, unspoken etiquette. Failure was not merely a setback, it was a death sentence. The tingling in her wrist intensified, pulling her forward like a compass needle. She followed its subtle guidance deeper into the earth, the air shifting around her. The sterile scent of stone was now rich with the perfume of damp soil and the intoxicating fragrance of night-blooming flowers, a sweet, mysterious invitation into the heart of the hidden grove. The tunnel opened into a space that defied all logic, a vast underground glade bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed to have no source. Spectral figures moved through the air like memories given form, their silent rituals a beautiful, heartbreaking ballet of a lost age. Elara watched keepers of old tending to glowing flora and communing with shimmering wisps of light. Then she saw her, a younger version of her grandmother, stood by a still, dark pool, her projection turning to meet Elara's gaze with a profound sadness. She did not speak, but simply pointed a translucent finger toward the water's dark surface. The invitation was clear, and the pull was irresistible. Kneeling at the pool's edge, Elara plunged her hand into the icy water. The glade vanished. She was no longer an observer, but a participant, swept into a torrent of living memory. She felt the first spark of consciousness awakening in the ancient forest, a singular awareness woven through every root and leaf. This was the deep roots, not a written doctrine, but a living, breathing entity. Its health was the forest's health, its pain the forest's decay. The visions intensified, flooding her with the forest's joys and its profound sorrows, the emotional weight of physical pressure behind her eyes. She wanted to surrender to it, to lose herself in this endless history, but a sharp, urgent thought cut through the cascade, her mission, the village. The weakening forest, she fought against the current of memory, searching for an answer, a tool. Then she saw it, a ritual of healing performed during a past blight. Keepers stood in a circle, their hands pressed to the earth, their voices a low hum that resonated with the deep roots, coaxing life back into poisoned soil. She burned every detail into her mind, the specific cadence, the feeling of focused intent. With a gasp that tore at her lungs, she wrenched her hand from the pool, collapsing onto the soft moss. The glade was silent once more, the spectral figures gone. The final vision remained seared behind her eyes, a clear, terrifying truth. The forest was dying, and only a true keeper could mend the rupture. The weight of that responsibility was a stone in her chest, but it solidified her resolve. She could not stay here, lost in the past. She had to act. Rising on unsteady legs, Elara turned her back on the Glade of Memories. A new path had opened between the trees, and as she stepped onto it, the ancient trunks seemed to lean in, their branches forming a guiding archway that led toward a palpable sense of decay, a place crying out for the healing she now carried within her. The path of decay led her to a place of profound sorrow. This was the Blighted Grove. The trees stood like skeletal hands, clawing at a gray sky, their bark peeling away in ashen strips. A brittle carpet of dead leaves crunched under her feet, and the air carried the metallic tang of spoiled earth. This was not mere sickness. It was a violation of the deep roots themselves, a wound weeping into the physical world. The memory of the healing ritual from the glade surged to the forefront of her mind, a desperate blueprint for a desperate task. She worked quickly, her movements a prayer. From her pouch, she took her most precious seeds, ones passed down through her family, and gently coated them with the last of her luminescent spores. Kneeling, she pressed them into the poisoned soil, her hands flat against the cold ground. She closed her eyes and began the low, resonant hum she had witnessed, pouring her will into the earth, a plea for life. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft, green glow emanated from beneath her palms. The gray receded in a small circle around the seeds, and a single, vibrant shoot pushed through the soil, its leaves unfurling with a whisper of hope. But the forest's recovery was a spark in a sea of darkness. From the deepest shadows of the diseased trees, a shape detached itself. It was a wolf, but woven from splintered wood and solidified shadow, its eyes burning with a malevolent red light. It was a creature of the blight, a perversion of the forest's own guardians, born from the very imbalance she sought to heal. It lunged at her with a silent, terrifying speed. Every fiber of Elara's being, shaped by a life of peace and study, screamed to run, but to flee was to abandon the fragile new life she had just coaxed into being. This was no longer a test of knowledge, it was a fight for survival. The clash within her was instantaneous, her pacifist heart warring with the primal need to protect. She could not bring herself to kill a creature that was, at its core, a symptom of the forest's pain. A different memory surfaced, not of healing, but of restraint, a vision of keepers using woven light to subdue a raging bear without harming it. As the corrupted beast charged again, she sidestepped, her fingers digging into the earth. She called upon the connection the root Warden had forged, the tingling in her wrist, flaring with heat. Vines erupted from the soil where the beast's paws struck, tangling around its limbs. With a final, focused effort, she gathered the faint light from the glowing shoot and hurled it at the creature not as a weapon, but as a net. The strands of pure energy wrapped around the shadow wolf, and it howled, a sound of rage and confusion, as it fell, temporarily immobilized. It thrashed against the bonds of light and vine, its red eyes fixed on her with pure hatred. She had chosen preservation over destruction, but the cost was her own safety. As the beast finally tore itself free and retreated, limping, back into the blight, Elara stood panting, her body trembling with adrenaline. The small patch of healed ground remained, a testament to her success, but the attack was a far more ominous message. The corruption was not passive, it was defensive, and it was fighting back. Her eyes followed the path the beast had taken, and she saw it clearly now, a trail of sickly gray leading away from the grove and toward a jagged, black rocky outcrop in the distance. The heart of the decay was not everywhere. It was somewhere specific, and her journey was not over. It was just beginning. The jagged black outcrop rose before her like a broken bone, piercing the forest's skin. At its peak, half buried in the crumbling rock, was a single, smooth stone, covered in runes that seemed to writhe under her gaze. This was the Stone of Whispers. As she approached, the chaotic murmur of the forest sharpened into a single, clear voice in her mind, a calm, guiding presence that cut through her exhaustion. The voice spoke of the doctrine of celestial harmony, of aligning the world below with the patterns above. Scattered around the stone were several large, perfectly cut crystals, each humming with a different, pure note. Her task was clear. She had to arrange them to mirror the constellations her grandmother had painted on their cottage ceiling so long ago. Her hands trembled as she lifted the first crystal, a heavy piece of smoky quartz. The moment she set it down a fraction out of place, the ground shuddered violently, a sharp tremor that sent loose stones skittering down the outcrop. This was not a puzzle, it was a calibration, and the earth itself was the judge of her accuracy. Fatigue was a heavy cloak on her shoulders, and the fading daylight painted the sky in shades of urgent orange. Her botanist's mind, trained in logic and classification, screamed at her to calculate angles and trajectories, but the logic of the deep roots was different. It was a language of feeling, of intuition, of stories told by firelight. She closed her eyes, pushing the calculations aside, and instead reached for the memory of her grandmother's voice, describing the dance of the stag and the vine in the night sky. She moved the quartz, trusting the pull in her gut over the reasoning in her head. The next crystal, a shard of clear selenite, seemed to slide into its correct position, almost on its own, guided by an invisible hand. With the final piece, a sphere of green moss agate, settled into place, the world fell silent. Then the Stone of Whispers erupted with light. An intricate web of shimmering golden lines shot up from its surface, hanging in the air like a ghostly tapestry. This was a map of the forest's lifeblood, its ley lines. They all converged on a single, pulsating point deep within the most ancient part of the woods, a place the Whispers named the Heartwood. For a breathtaking moment, Elara felt a surge of triumph. She had found it, the core of the deep roots, but that triumph curdled into dread as she looked closer. The golden lines were not smooth and steady. They flickered and frayed at the edges, like old rope coming undone. The forest's life force was not just weak, it was unraveling, a system on the brink of catastrophic failure. The projected map faded, but its image was seared into her mind's eye. There was no time to rest, no time to doubt. As she turned and began her descent from the outcrop, the tingling mark on her wrist flared with a warm, insistent light, growing brighter with every step she took toward the converging lines. The path to the Heartwood was now clear, a race against a clock she could not see, but whose desperate ticking she could feel in the very air around her. The air grew heavy with the scent of wet stone and ozone as the path ended at a river of impossible stillness. Its surface was a perfect, dark mirror, reflecting not the canopy above, but scenes of shimmering possibility. Here was a future where the village celebrated her as a hero. There a future where the forest bloomed under her care. This was the river of reflections, and its silent, shifting waters were a test of the soul. To cross, she would have to build her own bridge. Vines hung thick from the trees lining the bank, and as her fingers touched them, they responded to her intent, weaving themselves into a narrow, living walkway that extended out over the water. The moment her foot touched the first woven step, the illusion struck. The bridge groaned, threatening to unravel, and the water below showed her a vivid image of her own broken body, lying at the base of the Sentinel Oak. She pushed forward, her jaw clenched, focusing on the feel of the living vines beneath her palms. Halfway across, the most potent vision yet rose from the depths. She saw herself returning to the village, the blight healed, her proof undeniable. But instead of gratitude, she was met with fear and hostility. The village elder pointed a trembling finger, his voice echoing across the water. "Sorceress, you have trafficked with demons. You are exiled." The vision was so real, so visceral, that Elara froze. Her foot slipped from the vine, and for a heart-stopping second, she teetered over the dark water, said to wash away the past itself. Despair washed over her, colder than the river could ever be. Was this all for nothing? Would her sacrifice only lead to isolation? The river fed on this doubt, showing her a simpler, easier path, a life of quiet obscurity where she abandoned this impossible quest. The conflict tore at her. Was she doing this for her grandmother's legacy, for glory, or for the forest itself? In that suspended moment, the truth became clear. The approval of the village, her own name, even her life, none of it mattered as much as the silent plea of the dying grove. Her purpose was not to be a hero, but a steward. A simple, profound peace settled over her. "I do this for the trees," she thought, "and for the balance, not for me." As she reaffirmed this commitment, her footing solidified. The vines grew strong and sure beneath her, and the tormenting illusions receded like mist. She walked the rest of the way with a calm certainty, the dark waters now showing only her own determined reflection. Reaching the far bank, she released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The emotional trial had been more exhausting than any physical challenge, proving that her own heart could be the most dangerous obstacle of all. As she steadied herself, her eyes fell to the soft mud at the river's edge. There, pressed clearly into the earth, was a single set of fresh footprints leading away into the trees. She was not the only one seeking the heartwood. The footprints led to a tree house woven so perfectly into the canopy, it was nearly invisible. An old man, with a beard of moss and eyes that held the deep sorrow of the forest, watched her approach. He introduced himself as Kale, the last keeper before the village turned its back. He had felt her progress through the woods, a tremor of hope in the long silence. Inside his arboreal shelter, surrounded by carvings of a world now fading, he shared his shame. His voice was a dry rustle of leaves as he confessed that decades ago, in his youthful arrogance, he had tried to force the deep roots to heal a drought. He had shouted the rituals of awakening, demanding power instead of requesting balance. The backlash was immediate, a surge of raw, untamed life that twisted the forest, creating the first scars of the blight. His failure was the origin of the decay she now fought. He pressed a smooth, warm seed into her palm, a sun heart seed that could only open in the heartwood soil. It was essential for the final ritual, a conduit to channel healing energy, but his warning was stark. The deep roots must be roused with a whisper, not a shout. Too much force, too much desire, and she would not mend the forest. She would shatter it. Elara listened, her respect for the old keeper warring with a new, fierce certainty born from the river of reflections and the living memories. His path was one of fear, shaped by a single, devastating mistake. Her path was different, forged by every test the forest had thrown at her. She had not just learned the old ways, she had felt them, lived them, and blended them with her own understanding. She accepted the seed and his wisdom with a grateful nod, tucking the vital key safely into her pouch. But silently, she made a decision. She would not approach the Heartwood with Kale's crippling caution. She would go with the augmented confidence of her visions, with the intuitive harmony she had proven in the cavern of symbols and on the stone of whispers. She would awaken the deep roots with reverence, but also with the strength of a true keeper. Thanking the old hermit for his painful truth, she climbed back down to the forest floor. His story was a heavy weight, a stark reminder that the power she sought was not a simple tool, but a wild, sentient force. As she turned to follow the pull of the Heartwood, the first cold drop of rain struck her cheek. She looked up to see bruised purple clouds churning in the sky, the gathering storm, a mirror of the turmoil she now carried within. The sky tore open with a fury that was anything but natural. Lightning, not of white, but of a searing, malevolent green, forked down from the churning clouds, striking the earth with a sound like shattering crystal. It did not strike randomly. It sought. A great pine, its life force already weakened by the blight, exploded into splinters just 100 paces from her. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the storm of ancients, a tantrum of the wounded deep roots, and its judgment felt terrifyingly personal. She scrambled for cover, her boots slipping on the suddenly slick ground, and flung herself into the dark mouth of a nearby cave. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and fear. Outside, the green lightning illuminated the forest in frantic, strobing flashes, each one revealing the terrified faces of animals fleeing for their own shelters. The storm's energy was a physical pressure, a chaotic scream in the air that made the very stone of the cave hum. The plants at the entrance began to writhe, their tendrils whipping wildly as if in pain, threatening to seal her inside this rocky tomb. Panic was a cold hand around her throat. She could rush out into the maelstrom, or she could be trapped. Then she remembered the mark. The tingling vine around her wrist flared with a sudden, warm heat, a stark contrast to the storm's cold rage. It was not a weapon, but a key. Pressing her marked wrist against the trembling moss and ferns at the cave's entrance, she poured her will through it, a silent, desperate plea for calm. A wave of soft green light pulsed from her skin into the plants. The frantic writhing ceased. The vines and leaves stilled, then began to weave themselves together, thickening into a living, breathing barrier that sealed the cave mouth with a wall of serene, defiant life. The storm's roar became muffled, distant. Safe inside her cocoon of greenery, Elara did not simply wait. She sat on the cool stone floor, closed her eyes, and began to meditate, reaching out with her newfound connection. She did not fight the storm's anger, but instead sought the profound pain beneath it, the source of this violent outburst. In her mind's eye, she saw the fraying ley lines, the poison of the blight, the deep, aching wound in the Heartwood. The storm was not an attack on her, she realized with a jolt of clarity. It was the forest's fevered delirium, a final, desperate attempt to purge an infection. Her own progress, her strengthening connection, was like a needle drawing close to a deep splinter, causing the body to flinch in anticipated pain. As the storm's fury finally began to ebb, its passing left the forest utterly transformed. The air itself crackled with a clean, sharp energy, every leaf and blade of grass seeming more vibrant, more acutely aware. When the woven barrier gently unfurled, retracting back into a normal patch of moss, Elara stepped out into a world washed clean and humming with life. And they were waiting for her. A stag with antlers like a crown of polished bone stood calmly to one side. A family of foxes watched from behind a fallen log, their eyes curious, not fearful. A hawk circled once overhead before settling on a branch. They did not flee, they simply observed, their collective presence a silent, profound acknowledgement. She had not just survived the storm, she had harmonized with it. They were not seeing an intruder anymore, they were seeing an ally. As the last of the purple clouds drifted apart, the great stag lowered its head, then turned and stepped into the undergrowth, not looking back. The other animals shifted, their attention focusing on the same hidden path. It was not a path she could have ever found on her own, a faint trail barely visible between two ancient, intertwined cedars. Their behavior was unmistakable, a silent escort for the final leg of the journey. The way to the Heartwood was now open, and its guardians were leading her home. The path between the cedars opened into a perfect circle of ancient trees, their trunks so wide she could not have encircled them with both arms. They were silent and immense, their bark like carved granite, and the air within the circle was preternaturally still. This was the Council of Elders, and they did not speak with words. A pressure built in her mind, a presence as vast and slow as continents shifting. It began with a simple, profound question that echoed in her soul. What is balance? Elara closed her eyes, reaching for the living memories of the glade and the pain of the blighted grove. It is not stillness, she answered silently. It is the wolf and the rabbit, the falling tree and the rising sapling. It is the constant, sacred exchange where death feeds new life. A second question followed, carrying the scent of decay from the grove she had healed. What is the purpose of the blight? Her heart ached with the memory of the shadow wolf, a creature born of pain. It is not an enemy to be destroyed, she responded, her conviction firm. It is a symptom, a fever meant to purge a system that has fallen out of harmony. To fight it with hatred is to fight the forest itself. The final question was a whisper of wind through leaves. What will you sacrifice for renewal? She thought of the river of reflections, of the village scorn, and a life of simple obscurity. My name, she answered without hesitation. My place among my own kind. The approval of others is not a root that sustains the world. A deep, resonant hum filled the circle, a sound of approval that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. One of the great trees shivered, and a single leaf, glowing with the captured light of 1,000 noons, drifted down into her open palm. It was warm and pulsed with a gentle, living energy. But with the gift came a final, urgent warning. Another seeks the Heartwood. Their heart is a closed fist, not an open hand. They would take the power for themselves, and in the taking, break the world. The pressure in the circle lifted. The council's test was over, their trust earned, but the true race had just begun. Clutching the sun-warmed leaf, Elara turned from the circle and ran, her senses screaming, every shadow now a potential enemy, every snapped twig a possible footfall. The final guardian, was no longer a beast or a storm, but a reflection of humanity's own greed, and it was closing in fast. The smell of damp earth and crushed ferns was the only warning she had before a figure dropped from a low-hanging branch, landing with a hunter's grace directly in her path. It was Kale, a man from the northern settlement, his smile as sharp as the obsidian blade at his belt. Charisma rolled off him like a physical force, and in his hands he cradled a small, pulsating crystal he had clearly pried from a sacred formation. He spoke of their shared struggle, of villages scraping by in the shadow of the woods. "Imagine," he said, his voice a low, persuasive hum, "if we stopped fearing this place and started owning it." The deep roots are not a secret to be kept, but a treasure to be sold. We could bring our people more wealth than they have ever known. His words were a seductive poison, twisting the sacred into the transactional. Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He saw the forest as a vault, its ancient wisdom merely a currency for power. Her refusal was immediate and absolute. "This knowledge is not a tool for conquest," she told him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It is a responsibility. Its balance cannot be bought." Kale's charming mask shattered into a scowl of contempt. He brandished a piece of vellum, a stolen map, etched with crude, desperate symbols. He did not need her permission, he spat. While she wasted time with rituals, he would take a shortcut. He scrambled up a steep, unstable embankment she had instinctively avoided, his boots dislodging stones. The mountain groaned in protest. With a sharp crack, a section of the cliff face sheared away, a cascade of rock and dirt, thundering down to completely block the most direct route to the Heartwood. The path was gone, and Kale was on the wrong side of it, clutching his bleeding arm and staring in shock at the destruction he had caused. A fierce conflict tore through Elara. Every instinct born from the Council of Elders told her to leave him. He was a blight of a different kind, his greed a direct threat to the forest's survival. But to abandon him was to embrace the very indifference the village had shown her. She could not become what she fought against. She called out to him, her offer a final test of his character. "I will guide you to safety, but you must leave the forest and abandon this quest. The artifacts you carry are anchors of this place's life. You are stealing its very breath." For a moment, he looked at the crystal in his hand, then back at her, his eyes hardening with a stubborn, foolish pride. He would find his own way, he shouted. He would not be lectured by a witch who talked to trees. Turning his back on her, he stumbled into the thick undergrowth, his figure quickly swallowed by the shadows. Elara was left with the echo of falling rock and a chilling certainty. The greatest danger to the deep roots was not a mindless corruption, but a conscious, calculating greed. Her race was now against a man who saw the world's heart as a prize to be won. With the direct path sealed, she turned toward a longer, more treacherous route. The weight of the sun warmed leaf in her palm, a constant, urgent reminder. Every moment of delay brought the unraveling of the ley lines and Kale's recklessness one step closer. The path ended abruptly at a wall of living barbed wire. Thorns the size of her finger wove together into an impenetrable barrier that shifted and creaked, its sharp points gleaming with a cruel, dark light. This was the Bridge of Thorns, and it did not offer a way around. It demanded a price for passage. Elara's throat was already parched. her canteen long since emptied. The only moisture left was in her single, full water skin, a precious reserve for the trials ahead. As she scanned the thicket in desperation, her eyes fell on a small, withered sapling struggling at the barrier's base, its leaves brown and brittle. The thorns seemed to choke the very earth around it. A whisper, not from the trees, but from a deep knowing within her, suggested this was no accident. The bridge would not open for a plea or a command. It would only part for an act of pure, unrewarded giving. The conflict was immediate and visceral. Her body screamed for the water, her tongue feeling like sandpaper. To pour it out on this one dying plant was madness, a gamble with her own survival. The thorns remained locked tight, unmoved by her hesitation. She looked from the desperate sapling to her own trembling, thirsty hands. This was the final test before the Heartwood, and it asked for everything. With a resolve that felt like tearing a piece of her own soul away, she uncorked the water skin. She did not sprinkle a few drops. She knelt and poured every last ounce of her life, giving water onto the sapling's roots, a silent offering to a single strand of life in a fortress of sharpness. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The thorns did not move. A wave of bitter regret washed over her. She had sacrificed her last comfort for nothing. Then a faint green hue returned to the sapling stem. A single new leaf unfurled. As it did, the entire thicket shuddered. With a sound like 1,000 sighs, the thorns retracted, weaving themselves into a solid, arched bridge over a chasm she had not even seen. The way was open, but the cost was real. A deep, gnawing thirst immediately took root in her, and a profound weariness settled into her bones. Her steps onto the bridge were slow and heavy, her body now a liability. Each movement was a battle against the temptation to simply lie down, to give up and let the forest claim her. She had proven her spirit was selfless, but the path forward would test the endurance of her flesh. Crossing the bridge felt like a lifetime, the world swaying with her lightheadedness. As her foot touched the far side, the air changed completely. The chaotic energy of the forest fell away, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. The very atmosphere grew thick and heavy, humming with a power so ancient it made her bones ache. She had arrived at the outer sanctum of the Heartwood, and the final, silent presence waiting within felt more immense than the sky. The silence in the sanctum was a physical weight, thick and humming with an ancient pulse. From the walls of woven roots, the root warden emerged, its amber sap eyes fixed on her, flanked by two smaller, fox-like guardians of shimmering bark and watchful stillness. They did not advance, but instead, one of the smaller guardians laid a single, withered sapling at her feet. Its leaves were gray and brittle, its stems scarred by the same blight she had fought in the grove. A silent command resonated in the air, clear and absolute. Heal it, now, with only what you carry. Panic was a cold spike in her chest. Her mind raced, inventorying the few precious items she possessed. The old hermit's seed felt warm in her pouch. The council's leaf pulsed with captured sunlight in her palm, and her own hard-won knowledge was a fragile thread in her mind. She had to unite them, to make them work in harmony. Failure was not an option. With Kale somewhere behind her, every second of hesitation brought him closer to the Heartwood. Dropping to her knees, she ignored her thirst and the guardian's unblinking gaze. She pressed the sun heart seed into the soil at the sapling's base. feeling its latent potential as a conduit. Then she placed the glowing leaf from the elders against the sapling's blighted stem, a direct infusion of pure, ancient life. Finally, she closed her eyes, recalling not just the ritual from the glade, but the feeling of it, the low hum of focused intent, the surrender of self, the profound trust in the balance. She began to hum, her voice a quiet thread, weaving the three elements together. The seed glowed, the leaf's light flowed into the stem, and her will became the bridge. The gray receded from the leaves like a tide. The brittle stem softened and swelled with green vitality, and in a breathtaking rush, the sapling burst into bloom, its flowers radiant and impossibly bright. The root warden bowed its great head, the creak of its wooden form, a sound of deep respect. The smaller guardians mirrored the gesture. Their approval was not just a permission slip, it was an acknowledgement. She was no longer a seeker or a student. She had become a true keeper, a living synthesis of the forest's scattered wisdom. As the last flower opened, the root-walled sanctum shifted. A section of the living wall peeled back in utter silence, revealing a tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. The air that flowed out was the very breath of the world, rich with the scent of deep soil and the sharp, clean tang of ozone. The path to the Heartwood itself was now open, and its rhythmic, pulsing light beckoned from the depths below. The Heartwood Chamber was a cathedral of living light. A colossal, tree-like core of pure energy pulsed at its center, its roots of solidified radiance weaving through the stone walls and floor. This was the deep roots made visible, the heart of the forest, and its steady, rhythmic glow was now weak and irregular, flickering like a dying star. Elara approached with a reverence that stilled her own heartbeat, the thirst and fatigue forgotten in the face of such majesty. Kneeling at the base of the shimmering core, she pressed the old hermit's seed into the soft, glowing earth. The moment it touched the soil, it sprouted. A brilliant tendril of white light shot upward, branching out like lightning to race along the Heartwood's roots. The entire chamber brightened, the pulse strengthening, a deep, resonant hum filling the air as the forest's lifeblood began to flow with renewed vigor. Then the peace shattered. Kale burst from the tunnel entrance, his eyes wild with greed, a stolen obsidian knife in his hand. He ignored Elara completely, his gaze locked on a fragment of the Heartwood where the light was most concentrated. "This is power," he snarled, lunging for the glowing root. The chamber's hum turned into a shriek of protest. The light flickered violently, casting frantic, strobing shadows. Elara was torn in two. To stop the ritual now would sever the connection, wasting the seed's energy and likely killing the Heartwood. But to do nothing was to let Kale tear out the forest's very heart. She could not fight him, not physically, and she would not kill. Her decision was instantaneous. She kept one hand pressed to the earth, pouring her focus into the humming ritual, and with the other, she reached out to the chamber walls. The living roots, now thrumming with the seed's energy, responded to her desperate call. Vines erupted from the stone, whipping through the air to wrap around Kale's arms and legs. They did not cut or crush, but held him fast, a prisoner of the very life he sought to steal. He thrashed against his living bonds, his shouts of rage echoing in the chaotic chamber. The Heartwood's energy was now a runaway storm, the light blazing too bright, the hum becoming a deafening roar. Stone dust rained from the ceiling as the entire cavern trembled. Any more disruption, any loss of focus, and the built-up energy would have nowhere to go but out. It would vaporize this chamber and send a shockwave of death through the forest above. As Kale struggled, the deep roots pulsed with one final, overwhelming surge of power, and Elara knew with terrifying certainty that the ritual demanded its completion now. The words of the Doctrine rose to her lips not as a learned chant, but as a living breath. Elara's voice, thin and strained against the chamber's roar, wove through the chaotic energy, a single thread of order in the storm. She channeled the captured sunlight from the Elder's leaf, feeling its pure, potent life flow through her and into the shuddering Heartwood. This was the final, delicate calibration. A trickle of power would be like a single raindrop on a wildfire, leaving the blight to fester. A torrent would be a flood, forcing such explosive, unchecked growth that the forest would strangle itself in a single, verdant day. Her body screamed in protest, her muscles trembling with the effort of containing the cascade. She was a dam, a valve, a fragile lens focusing the sun itself. In the periphery of her vision, Kale's trapped form thrashed, a reminder that any lapse in her concentration could be the end of everything. She could not force this. She had to harmonize. Closing her eyes against the blinding light, she let go of the effort and reached for the feeling. She remembered her grandmother's hands, steady and sure as they tended their own small garden. She felt the quiet hum of the keepers in the glade, their intent a gentle pressure, not a demand. She thought of the single sapling at the Bridge of Thorns and the profound peace of giving without expectation. She stopped pushing the energy and instead invited it, guided it, becoming a conduit for its own innate desire to be whole. The shift was instantaneous. The frantic, strobing light softened into a steady, brilliant glow. The shrieking hum deepened into a resonant, comforting thrum that vibrated through the stone and up through the soles of her feet. Outside, in the world above, that same light would be flowing through the ley lines, chasing the gray decay from the blighted grove, coaxing green life from poisoned soil, and silencing the storm's rage for good. The job was done. The last of the energy left her, and Elara collapsed to her knees, utterly spent, her body a hollow shell. The immense light in the chamber dimmed to a gentle, constant radiance, peaceful and secure. Across the room, Kale had stopped struggling. The vines still held him, but his head was bowed, his eyes wide as he stared at the now stable Heartwood. The raw greed was gone from his face, replaced by a dawning, humbled awe. He had seen a power that could not be owned, only served. From the chamber entrance, the root warden stepped fully into the light, its massive form silent. Its glowing sap eyes regarded the healed core, then settled on Elara's exhausted figure. It did not approach her, but simply stood, a silent sentinel, acknowledging a task complete. The immediate danger had passed, but in the profound quiet, a new question began to form, one not of survival, but of legacy. The deep roots did not speak in words, but in a torrent of living understanding that flooded Elara's mind. It was a library of sensation and memory, the entire history of the Whispering Woods flowing into her at once. She felt the secret language of the mycelial networks, the migratory patterns of birds written in the stars, and the delicate chemical signals a tree releases when under attack. She knew, with absolute certainty, how to speak to the wind and interpret the warnings in a rustling leaf. This was not just knowledge, it was a symbiotic bond. As this awakening settled within her, a wave of pure, green energy pulsed out from the heartwood, flowing back through the ley lines. High above, in the blighted grove, the gray decay dissolved like mist under a morning sun. Brittle branches softened and swelled with sap, and the metallic tang of spoiled earth was replaced by the rich perfume of loam and blooming nightshade. Animals tentatively emerged from their hiding places, their eyes clear and curious, nosing at the vibrant new shoots, pushing through what was once a graveyard. The root warden gave a low, creaking rumble of what could only be satisfaction. The vines holding Kale unwove themselves, retreating back into the stone. He dropped to his knees, not in exhaustion, but in awe, his gaze fixed on the now gentle glow of the heartwood. The avarice that had driven him was gone, replaced by a quiet, humbled curiosity. He looked at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time, and saw not a rival, but a bridge to a world he had never understood. The weight of the knowledge was immense, a responsibility that settled on Elara's shoulders like a mantle of ancient stone. She felt the fragility of every ecosystem, the precise tension of every predator and prey relationship. It was a burden that could crush a person, this intimate awareness of a world's entire well-being. Yet, intertwined with that weight was a profound sense of purpose, a clarity she had never known. The conflict was immediate. Should she use this power to command, to force the forest into a perfect, sterile order? Or should she become its humble student and guardian? The choice was clear. She would not be a ruler of the woods, but its keeper. She vowed silently to use this living library for protection and gentle guidance, to educate those who would listen, and to shield the balance from those who would break it for profit or power. The forest's sudden, vibrant recovery would not go unnoticed. The same energy that healed the blight would ripple outward, a beacon of life so potent it would surely draw the attention of other villages, other seekers, some with pure hearts and others with clenched fists. The deep roots were awake, and their light would shine in the darkness, attracting both allies and new threats. The root warden turned, its amber gaze lingering on Elara for a long moment before it moved toward the tunnel. It was time to leave the sanctuary. As Elara and a contemplative Kale followed the guardian out, a shaft of true, golden sunlight pierced the cavern entrance, illuminating the path ahead. They stepped out into a world reborn, the air crisp and alive, every leaf on every tree seeming to greet them with a silent, grateful sigh. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken regret. Kale finally stopped walking and turned to face Elara, his gaze dropping to the vibrant moss beneath their feet. "My people are not evil," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "They are just afraid and poor. I wanted to give them power over the forest because I thought it was the only way to save them from it. I was wrong." He looked up, his eyes clear of the greed that had clouded them before. "Let me help you. Let me use what little influence I have to teach my village a different way. Let me show them that conservation is a greater wealth than exploitation." Elara studied his face, hearing the echo of the river of reflections in his words. Trusting him was a risk that made her own heart feel fragile. His past actions were a wound, not easily forgotten. Yet the doctrine itself taught that a system out of balance seeks not to destroy its broken parts, but to heal and reintegrate them. To deny him a path to redemption would be to ignore the very harmony she had just fought to restore. "I will teach you," she said, her decision solidifying as she spoke, "but you must be willing to unlearn everything. The deep roots are not commanded, they are listened to. It will require a patience you have never known." Kale nodded, a profound relief washing over his features. This unexpected alliance was a fragile new shoot, its roots still shallow. Elara knew she could not give him the full depth of her connection, not yet. His first lesson would be one of observation and protection. She assigned him the vital task of monitoring the forest's borders, of learning the subtle signs of health and intrusion, and of turning away any who sought to enter with a closed heart. As they walked on, discussing plans for this new, shared guardianship, the forest itself seemed to lean in, the rustling leaves and cheerful bird calls forming a gentle chorus of approval. The potential for the doctrine to spread beyond the whispering woods was now a tangible hope, a chance to heal a wider world. But with that hope came a new, insidious fear. Would Kale's well-intentioned efforts simplify the ancient truths into mere rules? Could his village ever truly understand a wisdom that must be felt, not just heard? The alliance was a necessary risk, a first step into a future where the forest's whispers might one day be heard in the halls of men. The path back to the village felt like a journey into a forgotten life. The familiar wooden fences and thatched roofs seemed smaller, more fragile than she remembered. Her first stop was the community garden, a patch of dusty earth where a few stubborn vegetables clung to life, their leaves pale and wilting under the harsh sun. A small crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. They watched as Elara knelt, ignoring their murmurs. She did not chant or wave her arms. She simply placed her hands on the dry soil, closed her eyes, and reached for the quiet hum of the deep roots. A gentle warmth flowed from her palms into the earth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a collective gasp rippled through the onlookers as the wilted plants straightened, their leaves flushing with a vibrant, impossible green. New shoots pushed through the cracked ground, and the air filled with the sweet scent of damp earth and blooming basil. The silent demonstration was more powerful than any words. The villagers' skepticism melted into awe, and then into a hesitant, growing respect. They began to call her Keeper, a title not heard in generations, and asked for her guidance on everything from blighted crops to ailing livestock. This new respect, however, was not universal. A few elders, led by the stern-faced blacksmith, voiced their doubts. They saw her forest-friendly practices as a rejection of their hard-won control over the land. When Elara suggested leaving a strip of wildflowers to attract pollinators instead of clearing it for planting, the blacksmith scoffed. "We have spent decades taming this land, and you ask us to let the wilderness back in," he argued, his voice echoing the old fear that had once driven her away. The social friction was a subtle, constant pressure, a reminder that changing hearts was slower and more complex than healing soil. Faced with this resistance, Elara made a conscious choice. She would not command, she would teach. In the evenings, she began hosting gatherings by the central fire, just as her grandmother had. She did not lecture them on symbiosis or ley lines. Instead, she told stories. She spoke of the Root Warden's judgment, of the River of Reflections, and of the silent council of elders. She wove the principles of the deep roots into narratives of courage, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between taking and giving. Slowly, the villagers began to listen, not with the ears of students, but with the hearts of an audience rediscovering its own heritage. Her success in the village was a profound victory, solidifying her position and slowly reviving the old traditions. But with that success came a heavier burden. More and more people now depended on her, looking to her for answers she was still discovering herself. A single misstep, a failed healing, or a misunderstood lesson could shatter this fragile trust and send the community spiraling back into fear and isolation. The stakes were no longer just about the forest's survival, but about the village's soul. As the community slowly embraced the old ways, Elara felt a deep sense of belonging she had never known, a connection to her people that mirrored her bond with the woods. Yet, even in these moments of peace, the mark on her wrist would thrum with a soft, persistent energy, a constant reminder that her responsibilities did not end at the village border. The wider forest was always listening, and its needs were endless. The training began in a grove where the trees themselves felt like patient, silent instructors. Elara gathered the first small class of villagers, their faces a mix of curiosity and nervousness beneath the newly vibrant canopy. "We start not by taking," she told them, "but by listening." She guided them to press their ears to the rough bark of an ancient willow, to feel the subtle hum of sap rising, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. This was the first principle of the deep roots, to understand that the forest was a living, breathing community, not a warehouse of resources. Next, she taught them to identify plants, not by crude diagrams, but by the stories they told through their scent, their texture, and the company they kept. She showed them how Moonshadow Nettle, the same herb that had calmed the root Warden, grew best in the protective shade of ironwood trees, a lesson in symbiotic relationships. The children, with their unburdened hearts, learned fastest, their small hands gently tracing the veins of leaves as if reading a secret map. The community slowly began to change. Families started their own small herb gardens, using forest remedies for fevers and aches, and they learned to harvest only what they needed, leaving enough for the plants to thrive and recede. Their reliance on harsh practices, like clear-cutting thickets for firewood, dwindled as they discovered deadfall made better kindling and harmed nothing. The village was becoming self-sufficient in a way that nourished the land instead of draining it, but the old ways of thinking did not surrender easily. A small group of men, led by the stubborn blacksmith, decided to harvest a rare, glowing fungi from a part of the woods Elara had marked as protected. She had warned them that the fungi were the forest's communication network, and that disturbing their bed could destabilize the entire hillside. They ignored her, seeing only the potential profit. Their axes bit into the soft earth, severing the glowing threads. The result was immediate. The ground, robbed of the fungal web that held it together, gave way in a sudden, shallow mudslide that nearly buried one of their own. Panic erupted where there should have been quiet industry. Elara arrived not with anger, but with a grim resolve. She did not shout or banish them. Instead, she helped pull the shaken man from the muck, her hands caked in the very earth their actions had wounded. "Look at what was lost," she said, her voice calm but firm, gesturing to the torn hillside. "The fungi are gone. The soil is wounded. This was not a punishment from the forest." It was a consequence of ignoring its language. She made them responsible for the restoration, assigning them the tedious work of replanting the slope with deep-rooted grasses and tending to it until it was stable again. It was a lesson in cause and effect, a demonstration that the doctrine was not a set of arbitrary rules, but a practical understanding of how to live without breaking the world. The success of this fragile program was everything. If it failed, if the villagers reverted to fear and exploitation, the revived connection to the deep roots would wither, leaving the forest vulnerable once more. As the first class ended, and the villagers headed home with baskets of responsibly gathered herbs, a young girl ran up to Elara. She held out a single, perfectly shaped oak leaf, its surface unblemished and glowing with captured afternoon light. "For you, keeper," she whispered. Elara accepted the gift, her heart swelling with a fragile, powerful hope. This child saw the forest not as a threat or a treasure chest, but as a friend. The next generation was already learning to listen, and in their open hands, the future of the ancient knowledge felt secure. The child's gift of the oak leaf felt like a blessing, but its perfection was soon overshadowed by a creeping dread. Weeks later, a sharp, metallic scent drifted from the forest's northern edge, a ghost of the blight's foul breath. Elara followed the odor to a small, sickly patch of gray earth where the leaves curled inward, blackened at the tips. It was a resurgence, but it felt different, more concentrated and bitter. Her connection to the deep roots hummed with a specific, localized pain, a poison seeping up from below. Tracing the sensation, she found a fissure in the ground, half hidden by ferns, exhaling the stale, toxic air of a forgotten village mine, abandoned for generations, but still weeping its industrial venom into the soil. Confronting the village council was her next trial. She explained that the mine's hidden pollution was a festering wound, and that simply ignoring it would allow the sickness to spread. The blacksmith, his arms crossed, voiced the fear gripping many. That mine provided the ore for our tools and trade. Closing it for good could cripple us. The air in the meeting hall grew thick with tension, the old conflict between survival and stewardship flaring once more. Elara did not dismiss their fears. Instead, she stood before them with a new proposal, one born from her deep knowledge. "We do not need to reopen the earth to bleed it," she stated. "The forest itself offers alternatives." She spoke of the ironwood tree, whose heartwood was harder than forged steel, and of a particular river red that, when woven, could create ropes stronger than any metal chain. She was not asking for sacrifice, but for a shift in perspective, showing them that true wealth grew from the living world, not from beneath it. Gaining their hesitant permission, she organized a team. This was not a task for keepers alone. She needed the blacksmith's strength and the miner's understanding of underground structures. The cleanup was a delicate, dangerous operation. They could not simply wall off the mine. They had to coax the deep roots to heal the poison at its source. Elara led them to the fissure, where 2 root wardens now stood sentinel. She taught the villagers to work in rhythm with the great guardians, their shovels moving in time with the creaking shift of roots, their efforts focused by her low, resonant hum. It was a tense, exhausting dance with the earth itself, a direct confrontation with the consequences of their ancestors' choices. One wrong move could trigger a collapse or release a concentrated cloud of toxins. The success was hard-won. After days of careful work, the root wardens extended their own forms into the mine shaft, their wooden bodies absorbing and transmuting the metallic poison, sealing the fissure with a living, breathing plug of purified wood and stone. The gray patch of blight at the surface withered away, the soil beneath it returning to a healthy, dark brown. As the team stood back, weary but united, the blacksmith looked from the sealed mine to the ironwood saplings Elara had shown him, a grudging respect in his eyes. The compromise had held, yet as the last of the poison was neutralized, Elara felt a subtle but undeniable shift through the soles of her feet. The ley lines, now clean, did not simply return to their old patterns. They pulsed with a new, more complex rhythm, as if the deep roots had learned from this man-made sickness and were adapting, weaving new threads of awareness into their ancient network. The forest was not just healing, it was evolving, and the doctrine of the deep roots was evolving with it, preparing for threats its ancient heart had never known. The air in the village square hummed with a joy Elara had never thought possible. Laughter mingled with the scent of roasting nuts and honeyed cakes, and garlands of luminous fungi and fresh pine draped every home. This was the first festival of roots in generations, a celebration of the renewed bond between the people and the whispering woods. At the heart of it all, Kale stood with a small delegation from his northern settlement, their faces no longer etched with suspicion, but with a cautious wonder. They presented gifts not of gold, but of practical value, sacks of hardy mountain seeds and finely crafted tools, forged from the very ironwood Elara had championed. The offering was a silent vow of alliance, a bridge between two worlds that had only known fear. As the sun dipped below the trees, the rituals began. Villagers young and old joined in a spiral dance around the central fire, their movements a slow, graceful imitation of a growing vine, their feet tracing the sacred patterns Elara had taught them. The energy in the circle was a palpable, harmonious thrum, a symphony of gratitude and connection. But then, for just a single heart-stopping moment, Elara felt it. A sharp, dissonant note in the music of the dance, a flicker of cold intent that cut through the warmth like a shard of ice. It was gone as quickly as it came, but the echo lingered in her bones. The feeling was a stark reminder that their contentment was a fragile shield, and that eyes watched from beyond their circle of light, eyes that did not wish to join, but to take. As the final dance concluded and the villagers cheered, Elara stepped into the firelight, her voice carrying clearly over the happy crowd. "We have rebuilt a single village," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her people and Kale's. "But a single grove can still be felled by a storm. I propose we grow a forest of guardians. Let us create a network of keepers, a web of knowledge that spans every region, so that the doctrine of the deep roots is never again forgotten or isolated." A wave of excited murmurs and nods of agreement followed her words. The festival had done more than celebrate. It had unified, turning a local tradition into the seed of a cultural movement. As if in blessing, the forest itself responded. Fireworks of pure, natural light erupted above the canopy, not explosions of fire and noise, but silent, blooming flowers of green and gold energy that drifted slowly down like benevolent stars. The crowd gasped in collective awe, their faces upturned in the shimmering radiance. Elara's eyes, however, were drawn away from the spectacle, to the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing. There, standing perfectly still between two ancient oaks, was a tall, unfamiliar figure, their features obscured by the gloom. They made no move to join the celebration, only watched with an unnerving stillness before melting back into the darkness. The festival's success had woven their community stronger, but it had also made their light shine brighter in the night, a beacon that could attract far more than just allies. The celebrations had barely faded into the quiet of the night when the stranger stepped from the shadows. She moved with the fluid grace of a forest predator, her cloak woven from what looked like living moss and twilight. Up close, her eyes held the same ancient weight as the Council of Elders. She introduced herself as Lyra, a keeper from the ironwood forests far to the west, and her message was a cold blade to the warmth of the festival. An organization, she called them the Ithilgard Syndicate, was no longer just a rumor whispered between isolated guardians. They were a reality, a consortium of industrialists and arcanists who saw the deep roots not as a living entity, but as the ultimate power grid. They were already mapping ley lines with unnatural precision, drilling into convergence points to siphon raw life force for their city forges and mechanized agriculture. Their goal was not harmony, but dominion, turning the world's vital energy into a commodity. Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Her success in healing the Whispering Woods had not just been a local miracle, it had been a beacon, a flare of concentrated power that had lit up their hidden maps. The conflict was no longer contained to a single village or a lone greedy man. It had scaled into a war for the planet's soul, and her quiet grove was now on the front line. The immediate, gut-wrenching conflict was how much to tell her people. They had just rediscovered peace. Their trust in the forest was a delicate, newborn thing. To burden them with the knowledge of a global threat felt like a betrayal of the safety she had fought to give them. Yet, to keep them in the dark was to leave them vulnerable, their hard-won harmony shattered by an attack they could not possibly foresee. Secrecy, she realized, was a form of the same isolation that had nearly destroyed the keepers in the first place. She made her decision that very night, gathering Lyra and a somber Kale in her cottage. "We cannot defend the woods alone," she stated, her voice firm despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "We form a council, not of one village, but of all who remember the old ways. You, Lyra, will reach out to the other keepers you know. Kale, use your connections with the northern settlements, not to recruit soldiers, but to find those who listen to the wind. We must weave a web of awareness, or the syndicate will pick us off one grove at a time." The stakes had irrevocably escalated. This was no longer about healing a blight, but about facing an enemy that understood power in a way the forest never had to. Alliances would need to be forged, and sacrifices far greater than a single water skin would likely be demanded. After Lyra departed with the first light, a determined shadow heading west to gather her scattered allies, Elara walked alone into the woods. The familiar path felt different, charged with a new and ominous significance. She did not seek the comfort of the Heartwood, but the wisdom of the Ancient Ones. She needed to ask the Council of Elders a new, terrifying question. Not how to heal, but how to fight a war without becoming the very thing she sought to defeat. The Council of Elders did not need words to confirm Lyra's warning. As Elara stood once more in their silent circle, the immense trees projected a cascade of visions directly into her mind. She saw forests to the west, their ley lines pierced by cold, metallic conduits that bled shimmering life force into glowing tanks. She felt the agony of ancient groves withering into gray dust, their sacred silence broken by the relentless hum of industry. The Ithilgard Syndicate was not a future threat. It was a present, spreading plague. The Elders' Council was a single, resonant command woven into these horrifying images. Strengthen your home. The roots must be made into a shield. To do this, she would need to forge a deeper, more permanent bond with the deep roots than ever before, a connection that would require all her focus. They taught her a new ritual, a complex pattern of intent, designed to weave protective energy directly into the ley lines of the Whispering Woods. It was not a spell of aggression, but one of subtle deflection and concealment, meant to make the forest appear dormant and unremarkable to the Syndicate's searching instruments. The process, however, was grueling. It demanded she spend hours each day in deep meditation, her consciousness spread thin across the vast network of the forest, her physical body left vulnerable and still as stone in a secluded grove. The very connection that had once filled her with purpose now demanded a profound isolation. She missed the sound of the children's laughter during lessons, the warmth of the communal fire, the simple satisfaction of resolving a villager's worry. The community she had fought so hard to build was thriving just beyond the trees, and she could not fully be a part of it. The conflict tore at her, a quiet sorrow beneath the immense responsibility. How could she protect her people if she had to withdraw from them? Yet, the alternative was to leave the woods, and the village along with it, utterly defenseless. Her decision was a painful but necessary sacrifice. She gathered her most trusted apprentices, including a now solemn and dedicated Kale, and delegated the daily governance of the village to them. Kale would oversee the practical teachings and border watches, while others would tend to the community's spiritual and physical needs. She was placing the future she had nurtured into their hands, trusting them to guard it while she guarded the land itself. This new duty transformed the Doctrine from a path of healing into a strategy for a long, silent war. The threat was no longer a single blight or a lone treasure hunter, but a persistent, sophisticated enemy that would not stop. The stakes were no longer just the survival of a grove, but the integrity of the natural world's most sacred places. As Elara settled into the moss for her first attempt at the weaving ritual, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath. The birds fell silent, the wind stilled, and the very light dimmed. Closing her eyes, she reached for the humming core of the deep roots and felt it stir in response, not with peace, but with a grim, ancient readiness for the challenges gathering on the horizon. The air over the first ley node crackled with unseen energy as Elara began the weaving. Her voice was a low, resonant thread, her hands tracing symbols of protection and concealment in the air that left faint, shimmering trails of green light. Each chant was a knot in an invisible net, each symbol an anchor point in a web of intent, designed to turn away any heart filled with greed or violence. The process was not one of force, but of delicate persuasion, convincing the forest's own life force to rise up and cloak itself. It demanded every ounce of her focus, a total surrender of self that left her body trembling and her mind stretched thin across miles of ancient roots. She could feel the probing tendrils of the Syndicate's arcane instruments, cold and analytical, skittering against the edges of her consciousness like insects on glass. They were testing for weakness, for a crack in the forest's spiritual armor, and their presence was a relentless pressure, urging her to work faster, even as her own strength ebbed. A distant part of her registered the sound of a snapped branch, a potential disruption, but she did not break her concentration. She trusted Kale and the others to handle it, to be her eyes and ears while her spirit was elsewhere. This act of delegation, of faith in her apprentices, was as much a part of her growth as the ritual itself. With a final, gasped syllable, she sealed the last ward. A wave of visible energy erupted from the node, a dome of faint, shimmering light that arched high into the sky before fading from sight, leaving behind only a profound, humming stillness. The Whispering Woods was now a fortified bastion, its defiance made manifest, but the effort cost her dearly. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the soft moss, her body drained and hollow. In making the forest a shield, she had painted a target on it, declaring war not with a shout, but with a silent, impregnable wall. As she lay there gathering the strength to stand, a runner arrived, breathless. The message from Kale was urgent. His scouts had spotted strangers, a small but well-equipped group, setting up a permanent-looking camp just beyond the newly raised wards at the forest's edge. The scholar's camp was a stark, orderly wound in the forest's edge. Kale's report had been precise, but seeing it for herself made Elara's skin crawl. The men and women wore simple robes, but their tents were anchored by humming metal rods, and strange crystalline devices scanned the trees with methodical, hungry sweeps. Disguised in the drab wool of a village herbalist, Elara approached with a basket of common herbs, her curiosity a carefully crafted mask. She offered them fresh water and asked innocent questions about their research, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They were polite, even charming, speaking of cataloging rare mosses and tracking bird migrations, but their eyes lingered too long on the subtle glow of her warded forest, and their camp held the sharp, ozone scent of focused arcanism. It was when she pretended to stumble near a larger tent, its flap slightly ajar, that she saw it, a device of polished brass and pulsating violet crystal, its purpose unmistakable. It was a lay siphon, designed not to study, but to extract. And then she heard their leader, a woman with cold, intelligent eyes, speaking in low, confident tones to her second. "The Heartwood is the source," she said. "Our rituals will not ask for its power, they will command it. The old ways are a lock, and we have the key." The words were a confirmation colder than any warning. The Elder's visions were not just possibilities, they were already in motion. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to rally the root wardens, and bury these intruders in a tide of wood and wrath. But a reckless attack would only reveal the forest's strength and invite a greater, more prepared force. She had to be smarter. She had to try the path of peace first, even if she knew it would fail. Gathering her courage, she revealed herself not as a simple herbalist, but as the keeper of the Whispering Woods. She made them a generous, desperate offer. "I will guide you myself," she proposed, her voice steady. "I will show you the true wonders of this place, its healing plants and ancient stories. In return, you pack your instruments and leave, with a greater understanding than any device could give you." The lead scholar's smile was thin and patronizing. "Your stories are charming," she replied, "but we are beyond such folklore. We are here to progress, not to listen to fairy tales." The refusal was absolute. Their technology was not just a threat, it was a philosophy, one that rendered the living wisdom of the deep roots obsolete in their eyes. Retreating back into the safety of the trees, Elara felt a new kind of fear crystallize within her. This was not a battle of strength against strength, but of a whispering truth against a shouting certainty. How could she defend a living network against an enemy that refused to believe it was alive? The Doctrine spoke of harmony and balance, but these scholars wielded a power that sought to bypass both entirely. The first, fragile hope for diplomacy had shattered against their arrogant resolve, leaving only the grim certainty of a coming storm. She had to return to the village and the council, not with a warning, but with a declaration of war and a plan to fight an enemy who saw her deepest beliefs as nothing more than quaint superstition. The border hummed with a tension thicker than the summer heat. Elara stood flanked by Kale and two immense root wardens, their amber eyes glowing as the scholars advanced with their humming device. She did not raise a weapon. Instead, she reached for the deep roots and asked the forest to speak for itself. The very ground seemed to sigh. Ancient oaks groaned, their trunks shifting just enough to close the path the scholars had used, while new, thorny thickets sprouted with impossible speed to block another. A great stag and a family of boars emerged from the undergrowth, standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the intruders with a unified, unnerving intelligence. The message was a living, breathing wall of refusal. For a moment, the scholars faltered, their confidence replaced by primal unease. Then their leader sneered, adjusting a dial on her crystalline device. A wave of discordant, high-pitched energy pulsed outwards. The illusions flickered like a mirage. The trees wavered in their new positions, and the animals flinched, their coordinated stance breaking. The forest's gentle persuasion was being torn apart by a scream of pure noise. Elara felt the disruption like a physical blow, a tear in the delicate web she had woven. Persuasion had failed. Now she had to protect. She met the lead scholar's triumphant gaze, her own resolve hardening. "We will not harm you," she stated, her voice carrying over the device's whine. "But you will go no further." With a silent command, the root wardens moved. Their roots erupted from the soil, not as weapons, but as restraints, coiling around the scholar's legs and the metallic legs of their equipment, with the gentle, unyielding force of nature itself. Vines wove a living cage around the disruption device, muffling its piercing whine. As the scholars shouted and struggled against their earthy bonds, Elara focused her will. She channeled a single, concentrated burst of the deep roots energy, a lance of pure, harmonious life. It struck the crystalline core of the device, not with violence, but with overwhelming order. The machine shuddered, its violet light flaring once before dying with a pathetic sputter of smoke. Silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. The forest's illusions solidified. The animals held their ground, and the scholars, now truly contained, fell into a stunned, fearful quiet. They were escorted to the edge of the woods by a silent honor guard of wolves and root wardens, their retreat a clear victory. Yet as Elara watched them go, she knew this was not an end. She had been forced to reveal a fraction of her true strength. The Whispering Woods was no longer a hidden secret. It was a known fortress, and its powerful guardians would only make the Syndicate more determined to possess that power. The deep roots hummed with a warm, approving energy, a job well done. But within that hum, a new and urgent sensation pierced her mind. It was a chorus of distant, pained whispers, visions of other forests, other heartwoods, crying out as cold metal pierced their soil. The fight for her home was over for now, but the war for the world had just called her name. The pained cry echoed not in her ears, but in the very roots of her being. It was a chorus of desperate whispers from across the jagged mountain peaks, a plea carried on the ancient network of the deep roots. A sister keeper, her spirit frayed with exhaustion, showed Elara a vision of a forest she had never seen, a vast expanse of once proud trees, now weeping a familiar, sickly gray blight. It was the same corruption she had healed in her own grove, but magnified 1,000-fold, a continent-spanning sickness, threatening to snap the lifeline of an entire ecosystem. The summons was clear and desperate. They needed her expertise, the specific resonance of her success. Her duty, she realized with a sinking heart, did not end at the borders of the Whispering Woods. The world itself was calling for a keeper. This new responsibility tore at her. How could she leave her village, the community she had fought so hard to unite and protect? To abandon them now felt like a profound betrayal, especially with the Syndicate's shadow still looming. And then there was the quieter, more personal fear, the deep weariness that still lingered in her bones from the last great working. Could her spirit withstand another crisis of this magnitude, or would it shatter under the weight of a dying world? The conflict between local loyalty and global necessity was a chasm opening at her feet. She brought the grim news first to the village council, then stood before the silent council of elders. She did not ask for permission, but for wisdom. The ancient trees offered no easy answers, only a single, resonant truth. A forest is not a collection of isolated groves, but a single, breathing entity. A sickness in one root will, in time, poison them all. The choice was hers, but the path of a true keeper was clear. She would go. Turning to Kale, she placed a hand on his shoulder, appointing him temporary keeper in her stead. His nod was solemn, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by a humble understanding of the trust she was placing in him. She would not go alone, selecting her 3 most promising apprentices to accompany her, their training now accelerated by the urgency of the journey ahead. This decision irrevocably expanded the scope of her mission. The revival of the Doctrine was not a local restoration, but the first green shoot of a global renewal. Her actions were no longer just about saving a forest. They were about setting a precedent for all future keepers, proving that their stewardship must extend beyond familiar horizons. As she packed her few belongings, the weight of this new role settled upon her. Stepping out into the twilight, she walked to the Sentinel Oak, the great tree that had first granted her entry. She pressed her palm against its warm, rough bark, a silent farewell. In response, she felt a deep, grounding pulse travel up from the earth, a surge of strength flowing into the ancient roots beneath her feet. The forest was not weakening with her departure. It was fortifying itself, holding fast to the balance she had restored. It was a promise, written in wood and earth, that her home would endure until she returned. Dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, as Elara and her 3 apprentices stood at the western edge of the Whispering Woods. The air before them shimmered, a visible heat haze that was not born of the sun, but of the concentrated life force flowing through the earth. This was the ley line, their hidden road. With a deep breath, Elara stepped onto the shimmering path, and the world blurred. Trees became streaks of green, the ground a rushing brown river beneath their feet. They were not running, yet they moved faster than any horse, carried on the silent, urgent current of the planet's own pulse. To communicate over the rushing wind, they had to learn a new language, one of hand signals and focused mental images passed through their shared connection to the deep roots. At first, the attempts were clumsy, a jumble of confused impressions. A warning about a low-hanging branch arrived as a feeling of dizziness. A request to slow down translated as a sudden, shared craving for blackberries. But with each mile, their bond tightened. They learned to weave their intentions together, creating a silent, efficient web of awareness that made the four of them feel like a single, coordinated entity. The journey was not a smooth ride. The ley lines, sensitive to the world's turmoil, were prone to magical turbulence. A pocket of corrupted energy sent a storm of disorienting illusions swirling around them, phantom wolves and whispering voices that sought to lead them astray. One of the younger apprentices, Liam, froze in panic. But before Elara could intervene, the other two, Sari and Fen, acted on instinct. Sari hummed a low, stabilizing note she had learned in the village, while Fen projected a clear, strong image of their true path. Together, they dissolved the storm, their combined effort far more effective than any one of them could have managed alone. Later, a territorial pack of prismatic foxes, their fur shifting to match the churning energy of the line, blocked their way, hissing with sparks of defensive magic. Elara held back, her heart in her throat, letting the apprentices handle it. It was Liam, learning from his earlier fear, who remembered a story Elara had told about offering respect. He slowly withdrew a piece of whey bread and placed it on the ground, bowing his head. The foxes sniffed, their aggression melting into curiosity, and then they were gone. Each small victory was a stone placed firmly in the foundation of their trust. Elara watched them, a fierce pride warring with a deep, gnawing anxiety. They were so young, their connection to the deep roots still so new and tender. Were they truly ready to face a corruption that had choked an entire continent? They looked to her for every decision, their eyes full of a faith that felt heavier than any pack. She knew she had to break them of that dependence, for the Doctrine could not live and die with a single person. So she began to step back. When the path forked, she asked them which branch felt stronger. When they needed to rest, she tasked Sari with finding a safe node of energy to replenish their strength. She was planting the seeds of her own obsolescence, and it was the hardest lesson she had ever had to teach. The success of this journey was about far more than reaching a destination. It was a trial run for a future where knowledge was a living network, not a buried secret. If they could forge this bond, they could potentially link forests across the world, creating a web of awareness that no syndicate could ever fully silence. The stakes of their small, traveling fellowship had expanded to encompass the future of guardianship itself. As they crested a final, rocky ridge, the ley line deposited them onto solid ground. The air grew still and heavy. Below them, sprawled across the horizon, lay the afflicted forest. It was a vast expanse of graying trees, a landscape bleeding into a monochrome nightmare. The sight was a physical blow, but it was the feeling that followed that truly stole her breath. The deep roots within her, the living core of her own being, did not recoil in horror. It stirred, a deep, resonant hum of purpose that vibrated in her bones. It recognized a part of itself in pain, and it answered with a clear, single directive: heal. The air in the blighted forest was a thick, suffocating blanket of decay. At the center of the gray wasteland stood the source of the sickness, a sight that made Elara's heart clench in sorrow. It was an ancient heartwood tree, but its core was now a pulsating knot of black, thorny corruption. Its once brilliant roots now brittle and gray, weeping a viscous, shadowy sap that poisoned the earth with every drop. This was not a simple illness. It was a perversion, a sacred guardian turned into a fountain of death. The tree fought their approach, lashing out with tendrils of dark energy that felt like despair given form. One grazed Liam's arm, and he cried out, not in physical pain, but as if he had been shown a vision of absolute hopelessness. They could not destroy it, for to do so would be to murder a part of the deep roots itself, dealing a wound the global network might never recover from. The only path was a healing, but it was a ritual that had never been attempted, a desperate act of spiritual surgery. Elara gathered her trembling apprentices around her, their faces pale but resolute. "We must link our wills," she told them, her voice a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. "We do not attack the darkness. We remind the light of what it is." She began the hum, the same resonant tone that had mended her own grove, and one by one, her apprentices joined her, their voices weaving into a single, harmonious chord. They pressed their hands to the poisoned soil, and as their combined energy flowed into the earth, the corrupted tree recoiled. A storm of black thorns and psychic screams erupted from its core, a defense mechanism of pure, terrified malice. The assault was overwhelming. Sara's hum faltered as a vision of her family forgetting her face threatened to shatter her concentration. Fenn's hands trembled, his connection wavering under the weight of the tree's immense, centuries-long pain. Elara felt the collective effort crumbling, the fragile web of their intent about to snap. In that moment of absolute crisis, every lesson converged within her. She remembered her grandmother's gentle hands, teaching her that force breaks, but patience mends. She saw Kale's humbled eyes, a testament that even the most broken spirit could be redeemed. She understood that this tree was not an enemy, but a prisoner of its own agony. To heal it required not more power, but boundless empathy. She made her choice. Instead of pushing harder against the darkness, she opened herself to it. She let down her own psychic shields and allowed the tree's pain to flood into her, feeling its centuries of isolation and betrayal. It was an agony beyond description, a fire that burned her from the inside, but she held fast, a living conduit for its suffering. Then, with a final, selfless act of will, she did not push the pain back into the tree. She pulled it into herself, sacrificing a portion of her own vitality, her own connection to the vibrant life of the deep roots, to make space for the light to return. A tangible piece of her bond with the forest severed, a permanent scar on her soul. As her energy faded, a brilliant, pure white light erupted from her hands, flowing not from her, but through her. It was the combined, amplified power of her apprentices, now unburdened by the defensive darkness, channeled through her sacrifice. The light washed over the corrupted heartwood. The black thorns dissolved into shimmering dust. The gray bark softened, swelling with renewed sap, and from its highest branch, a single, luminous leaf unfurled, its green so vibrant it seemed to color the entire gray world around it. The tree was healed. Elara collapsed, her body frail and hollowed, a fundamental part of her forever given away. But as she lay on the now softening earth, she felt not loss, but a profound, quiet peace. She had proven that the ultimate strength of a keeper is not in preservation, but in boundless, courageous compassion. The cost was immense, but the tree stood whole, its roots already beginning to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, sending the first waves of healing out across the blighted continent. The journey home was a quiet pilgrimage through a world slowly healing itself. Elara walked where she had once raced on currents of light, each step a conscious effort, her body a fragile vessel for a spirit that had given away a piece of its own fire. The vibrant hum of the deep roots was now a distant, muffled melody to her, a song she remembered more than felt. She had traded a portion of her connection to save a continent, and the price was a permanent, quiet hollowing inside her. She was no longer the forest's vibrant heart, but its scarred and knowing memory. Yet, as the familiar canopy of the whispering woods embraced her, she found not sorrow in her loss, but a profound and peaceful clarity. Her power had not vanished. It had been transmuted from a blazing sun into a steady, guiding moon. The woods themselves were a testament to this shift. They thrived under Kale's diligent care, the borders secure, and the village more self-sufficient than she had ever seen. He greeted her not with the awe reserved for a legend, but with the quiet respect of one steward to another, his report full of practical successes and small, managed challenges. He had proven that the Doctrine could flourish without a single, all-powerful keeper at its center. News arrived on the wind, carried by travelers and the soft whispers of the mycelial networks. The forest she had healed across the mountains was not just recovering, it was blossoming, its restored heartwood sending out pulses of strong, clean energy that strengthened the lands around it. Its keepers had formally allied with the whispering woods, creating the first strand of a living web of protected groves. The Doctrine was no longer a secret buried in one sacred place. It was a conversation starting between ancient trees. Elara's role evolved as naturally as a seedling reaching for the light. She became a mentor, a quiet source of wisdom for new keepers who arrived with eager hearts and questions that echoed her own from a lifetime ago. She did not teach them to replicate her journey, but to listen for their own. She showed them that the ancient language of the roots was not a rigid text, but a living grammar that could adapt to a blighted mind or a cynical scholar. Her greatest lesson was her own presence, a living illustration that true strength was not in hoarding power, but in the courage to spend it for a world beyond one's own horizon. She was a symbol, but not a statue. Her legacy was not carved in stone, but rooted in the vibrant, breathing world she had helped to save. The mark on her wrist no longer tingled with urgent energy, but rested quiet and warm, a finished promise. New threats would always gather on the horizon, and the Ithilgard Syndicate was far from defeated. But the deep roots now pulsed strongly across regions, a network of resilience that could withstand a storm that would have shattered a single grove. The story of the Whispering Woods was no longer a ending, but a strong, healthy seed from which countless new stories of guardianship and discovery would inevitably grow.